The first time it happened, I thought it was just a delivery mistake. You live in America long enough and you know how it goes. UPS guy drops a box at the wrong porch, Amazon driver takes a picture in front of the wrong door, and suddenly your socks are in somebody else's living room. But when it started happening again and again, always to the same house next door, I knew this was not just bad luck. This was my bad neighbors. Their names were Ron and Sheila Turner, a couple who moved into the split-level ranch house in Garland, Texas, right next to mine. At first, they seemed like your typical suburban pair. Ron with his oil-stained jeans and cheap beer belly, Sheila with her endless cigarettes and gossip-ready voice. But after a few weeks, the mask slipped. They became the kind of people who let their grass grow knee-high, who left rusted cars on the curb, who blasted music at midnight and called it their right as Americans. And then came the packages. My first missing box was just a set of replacement air filters for my HVAC. Nothing fancy, $20 at most. When I noticed the delivery confirmation email and no box on my porch, I shrugged it off. But the second time it was a pair of new sneakers for my son, and that was harder to ignore. The third time, it was a box containing my new wireless router, something I desperately needed to work from home, and that was when my blood started boiling. I went next door with the tracking number pulled up on my phone. Sheila answered the door, smoke swirling around her like a ghost of bad choices. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said flatly, eyes darting toward the living room behind her. I swear I saw the corner of an Amazon Prime box sticking out from behind their recliner, but she slammed the door before I could push further. The feeling inside me shifted from frustration to suspicion, then to a kind of tight-chested anger that only bad neighbors can create. I was raised to mind my business, to avoid stirring conflict, but watching my family's things disappear into their house while they smirked about it lit a fire under me. I started noticing patterns. The drivers always left packages around 2 p.m., when Ron was usually home watching daytime television with the blinds half open. By 2:05, the box would be gone, like clockwork. The anger did not just stay inside me, it seeped into everything. Into the way I double-checked my doors at night, into the way I clenched my jaw when I drove past their driveway, into the way my wife tried to soothe me with, maybe it is just a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew this was not confusion. This was theft dressed up as neighborly accident. Still, I wanted to believe in solutions, in some American idea of fairness. I called FedEx and UPS, each telling me the same line. "Sir, once the package is marked delivered, there is nothing we can do." Amazon gave me refunds, sure, but only up to a point. After the third claim, the messages started coming. "We notice unusual activity on your account. Please confirm your deliveries." It felt like I was the criminal, while Ron and Sheila Turner kept sitting in their smoke-filled living room, tearing into my router like it was Christmas morning. It was my son's disappointment that broke me. He stood on the porch looking down the street, waiting for his sneakers. When I told him they would not be coming, he asked me quietly, "Dad, do the neighbors keep our stuff?" Kids have a way of seeing the truth without the filters we adults use to survive. That was the moment I stopped waiting for kindness and started preparing for war. I'd always thought of war in the suburban sense. Loud arguments across property lines, nasty notes left under windshield wipers. But in America, real revenge comes through paperwork. You do not throw punches, you throw statutes. You do not break windows, you break credit scores. That realization was my turning point. First, I invested in technology. I bought a Ring doorbell, not the basic model, but the one with motion detection, cloud storage, and an ultra-wide lens. I signed up for the Neighborhood Watch app that lets you share suspicious activity. I started compiling a file because in this country, everything that matters has a file number. I labeled it Turner Theft, typed in Courier New like it was an FBI dossier, and began logging every incident. The footage began piling up. Box on porch, Ron stepping onto my property, box disappearing into his hands. Sometimes Sheila, sometimes both. They looked straight into the camera once, unfazed, like they were daring me to try. They acted like it was totally fine, like this was not stealing, but simply rerouting. I did not run next door screaming. I played it cool. I wanted them comfortable, sloppy, but inside, my anger had matured into something colder, more patient. I thought about insurance policies, about homeowner liability, about federal mail theft statutes. Title 18, Section 1708 of the United States Code. Theft of mail is a federal offense, punishable by fines and prison time. Those words burned into me like scripture. My bad neighbors were not just annoying freeloaders, they were federal criminals. Still, there was a sick comedy in it all. I would sit in my living room, watching the footage, imagining black-suited agents rappelling from helicopters, storming the Turner residence like it was a cartel hideout. In reality, it was just Ron in sweatpants scratching his belly while he stole a box of replacement printer ink. But the absurdity of it only made my obsession stronger. I started to think of it less like a neighborhood squabble and more like a conspiracy. What if the Turners were part of something bigger? What if they had friends at the courier companies, rerouting packages across the city? What if my missing rotor was now powering a secret underground bunker? It sounds ridiculous, but when you live long enough next to bad neighbors, your mind starts spinning tales darker than Netflix thrillers. At night, I would sit with my coffee, scrolling through federal law websites, insurance claim policies, and consumer protection statutes. My wife thought I was losing it. Maybe I was, but in that madness, I found clarity. If I was going to win, I had to stop thinking like a victim and start acting like an investigator. I was not just a neighbor anymore. I was a caseworker, a federal witness, a man preparing to drag the Turners into a world they never imagined. Courtrooms, penalties, liens, garnishments. It all began with a package. It was small, just a box of tools I needed for my job. But when I watched the Turners take it, carry it across the property line, and vanish inside their den of smoke and bad television, I knew the story had shifted. This was not about air filters or sneakers. This was about respect, about the invisible contract of suburban America where you leave your neighbor's porch alone. They had broken it, and in doing so, they had broken something in me. By the end of that week, I was ready. Not for a yelling match, not for a fist fight, but for a campaign of paper, policy, and patience. My bad neighbors thought they were untouchable, thought they could act like it was totally fine. They had no idea they had just signed themselves up for a federal lesson in what happens when you steal mail in America. The file I built on the Turners sat heavy on my desk like a sacred text. I had affidavits of my own writing, screen grabs of delivery confirmations, cloud-synced ring footage, even a notarized timeline of every missing item. In any other country, maybe it would be a neighborhood squabble, but this was America. Here you do not shout across fences, you build a case file thick enough to choke a donkey, and then you unleash it on the right desks until the gears of law, finance, and bureaucracy grind your enemy into dust. My bad neighbors had no idea that their smug little porch heists had turned into my personal crusade. I started with the United States Postal Inspection Service, because every American learns at some point that mail theft is not just petty theft, it is a federal crime. The agent on the phone listened politely, asked for case numbers, and I rattled them off like a preacher quoting Psalms. When I uploaded the footage through their secure portal, I imagined men in suits watching Ron Turner on a projector, pausing, rewinding, circling his greasy hand, grabbing my package like it was the Zapruder film. Suddenly, my bad neighbors were not just irritating, they were a federal case number with my name attached. But why stop there? Insurance companies have a funny way of punishing people without ever stepping into a courtroom. I called my homeowner's insurance, explained the recurring neighborhood theft issue, and within days an adjuster came out. He took photos of my porch, my cameras, even my fence line. 2 weeks later, I got a letter saying my policy had been updated to include package protection clauses, and that any further thefts would not only be reimbursed but investigated for liability against adjacent properties. Translation: if Ron or Sheila so much as sneezed in the direction of another Amazon box, the insurance company would come knocking, and those people have lawyers on retainer, like other folks have dentists. The Turners had no idea they were already bleeding financially. A neighbor told me she overheard Sheila complaining about their premiums going up. That was my doing. Every call, every form, every report was another needle in their bloated balloon. I was weaponizing paperwork, the most American revenge there is. Still, anger needs fuel, and I had plenty. One Friday, I came home to find a heavy box missing from my porch. It was supposed to be a DeWalt drill set for a side job I had picked up. Gone. When I checked the footage, there was Ron, waddling over in his Dallas Cowboys pajama pants, snatching the box like it was his birthright. I should have been furious, but instead I felt amused. Because this time, the package was insured, federally tracked, and registered under a sting protocol I had set up with the delivery company. Ron was now starring in his own episode of How to Commit a Felony in Sweatpants. I filed the paperwork that night, sipping a Bud Light like it was communion wine. As the weeks passed, letters started arriving, not to me, but to them. Citations, warning notices, insurance adjustment forms. I knew because I saw Sheila out on her porch holding a stack of mail, screaming into the phone, "They cannot do this to us." Oh, but they could. In America, your credit score is more fragile than your bones. Once the collectors sniff blood, it is over. Yet my mind did not stop there. Something about the absurdity of it all pushed me into conspiracy territory. What if the Turners were part of a larger ring? What if their petty porch piracy was funding something bigger, like a shadow economy of stolen Wi-Fi routers and vacuum cleaners? I laughed at myself, but the thought stuck. I started sketching diagrams in a notebook. Arrows connecting Ron to Sheila, Sheila to the delivery companies to the wider world. By midnight, I had a whole map on my wall, string connecting photographs, as though I was chasing the mafia. My wife shook her head, but I swore I was onto something. When the first official citation came, I celebrated like it was the Super Bowl. It was not dramatic, just a thin envelope stating that residents of 1428 Oak Meadow Lane had been cited for suspicion of mail theft under federal statute, pending investigation. To them, it was just paperwork. To me, it was vindication carved into government letterhead. They had to sign for it too, which meant Sheila had to stand there while a uniformed officer handed her the notice. I wished I could have framed her face. My tactics were not all legal. I admit, a streak of dark humor crept into my strategy. One afternoon, I bought a stack of junk packages off eBay, empty boxes, damaged goods, random return labels. I wrapped them up, plastered my name all over them, and left them sitting on my porch like bait. Sure enough, Ron appeared, scooped one up, and carried it inside. What he did not know was that I had slipped an old prepaid credit card inside, one I had reported stolen years ago. By the time he tried to activate it, alarms must have gone off in some financial office. I laughed for a week, imagining Ron explaining to a bank officer why his fingerprints were on a flagged card. The funny thing is, as the punishments piled up, they never apologized. They acted like it was totally fine, like they were victims of some cosmic injustice. I heard Ron yelling across the street one evening, "This is harassment. We did not do nothing wrong." It was classic bad neighbors logic. Denial as oxygen, shamelessness as armor, but the cracks were showing. Their car got repossessed. Their utilities shut off for a week. I knew because Sheila came to my porch, of all places, begging to borrow an extension cord to keep the fridge on, and I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Packages are not free, Sheila. Neither is electricity." Then I shut the door. It was petty, yes, but in that moment, I felt the scales tipping. This was not the revenge I had dreamed of in the beginning, some dramatic confrontation in front of the whole neighborhood. This was quieter, more devastating, a slow bleed through bank accounts, insurance penalties, and government notices. They were being crushed not by my fists, but by the same American machine they had mocked. They wanted to play games with my packages. I answered with the weight of federal codes, financial penalties, and endless paperwork. And yet, in the quiet of my living room, watching Sheila pace her porch with a stack of bills in her hands, I felt a strange mix of triumph and pity. Triumph, because I had proven them wrong. Pity, because I knew the machine does not stop once it starts grinding. Once your name is in those systems, the punishments echo for years. They had asked for this war, but I had delivered it with such force that even I wondered if I had gone too far. Still, when I looked at my son lacing up his sneakers, the ones that had finally arrived without incident, I knew why I did it. This was not just about me. It was about teaching my family that we do not roll over when bad neighbors decide to act like thieves. In America, you fight with laws, insurance, and money. And I was only just getting started. By the time the third month rolled around, the Turners were no longer just bad neighbors in my mind. They had evolved into something larger, almost mythological. A suburban hydra that kept growing new heads every time I thought I had cut one off. Each fine, each insurance penalty, each citation I had triggered seemed to weaken them on paper. But somehow they still strutted around their porch with cheap beer cans and smug expressions. That smugness got under my skin until my imagination started running wild. What if they were not simply careless thieves, but operatives in some vast underground operation? What if their little suburban ranch house was a front for something darker? It started as a joke, but then it grew into a full-blown conspiracy board in my garage. I had string-connecting photographs of Ron bending over my porch, Sheila clutching a carton of Marlboros, delivery trucks circling like vultures. At 2 in the morning, I would stand there in my slippers, muttering about sleeper cells and porch piracy syndicates. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was prophecy. In America, sometimes the line between the two is thinner than a piece of dental floss. The strangest thing was how the institutions began to act like I was right. After my reports piled high enough, I received a call from someone at a federal agency, he would not say which one, asking if I could provide extended surveillance footage. He used phrases like porch piracy network and potential organized crime indicators. Suddenly, my bad neighbors were not just Ron and Sheila anymore. They were persons of interest. I felt like a witness in some Tom Clancy novel, except instead of nuclear codes, it was my missing DeWalt drill set. Then came the letters. Thick, official envelopes addressed not to me but to them, stamped with seals I had never seen before. Homeland Security, Department of Commerce, even something with an eagle clutching arrows that looked too serious for suburban mail theft. I knew because one afternoon I saw Sheila tearing them open on her porch, face pale, hands shaking. For the first time, the swagger drained out of her cigarette-puffed cheeks. She stuffed the envelopes in a trash bag and drove off, but I retrieved them later from the bin. The words federal audit and asset forfeiture leapt off the page like a gift from heaven. Meanwhile, I leaned into the financial warfare. I filed fraud alerts with the 3 major credit bureaus, claiming suspicious package-related activity tied to their address. The credit agencies did not laugh. They froze their scores, flagged their accounts, and mailed them notices that essentially painted a scarlet letter F on their financial lives. Try renting a car with a frozen credit report. Try buying a washing machine. My bad neighbors could not even upgrade their cable package without a financial cavity search. But the real absurdity came when I started imagining how deep this rabbit hole went. Sitting in my living room, watching the news, I became convinced that porch piracy was the backbone of America's shadow economy. Think about it. Millions of packages a day, a percentage siphoned off by neighbors like Ron and Sheila, redistributed through pawn shops, flea markets, maybe even black sites in Nevada. What if Amazon itself knew? What if the Turners were low-level cogs in a corporate conspiracy to drive up insurance rates and fuel the dead economy? I poured another coffee and scribbled in my notebook. Follow the packages, follow the money. At that point, revenge stopped being personal and became almost patriotic. I felt like I was not just avenging my sneakers, but defending the nation from a rot that started on porches and spread into Wall Street. Every form I filed, every claim I pushed, every agency I copied felt like loading ammunition into a cannon aimed at the decay of suburban America. My wife told me I was losing touch, that maybe I should let it go. But how do you let go when bad neighbors have morphed into a metaphor for everything broken in the system? One evening, I saw Ron in his driveway, arguing with a man in a suit. Not the kind of suit you buy off the rack at Kohl's, but the sharp charcoal kind government auditors wear. The man waved papers in Ron's face while Ron gestured wildly toward my house. For a moment, I swore the man glanced at me, gave a small nod, and returned to his car. My stomach twisted with satisfaction. They were circling him now, like hawks around a wounded animal. The fallout grew stranger. Their bank account was seized, their car repossessed, their utilities cut again. Rumors spread that Sheila's part-time cashier job had been suspended pending investigations. And neighbors started whispering. Nobody wanted to borrow sugar from a family flagged in federal databases. They had become suburban outcasts, radioactive in their own cul-de-sac. And me? I sat quietly, sipping my coffee, surrounded by my growing stack of documentation. Yet, I could not shake the feeling of comedy in all of it. Here were 2 people who thought porch piracy was a harmless little hustle, now caught in a bureaucratic cyclone that made Kafka look like a children's author. They acted like it was totally fine, but behind closed doors they were drowning in paperwork, penalties, audits, and frozen accounts. If Dante had lived in modern America, he would have added a circle of hell just for this. Eternal hold music with the IRS, endless insurance forms, credit reports locked forever in the red. My revenge had grown monstrous, but it was also absurd. I found myself chuckling at night, picturing Ron trying to explain to a federal auditor why there were 47 Amazon boxes in his garage labeled with my name, or Sheila standing in line at a payday loan office, only to be denied because her social security number had been flagged for package fraud. The thing about revenge in America is that it never looks like a duel at high noon. It looks like financial records, liability statutes, insurance, fine print, and letters stamped with eagles. It looks like watching your bad neighbors stumble under the weight of a system they never believed could touch them. And the more I leaned into it, the more I realized this was not just my war. It was a satire of the entire country. A war fought not with fists, but with filing cabinets. By the end of the summer, the Turners were shells of themselves. Ron no longer strutted shirtless on his porch. Sheila stopped gossiping in the driveway. Their mailbox overflowed with ominous envelopes. Their windows stayed dark at night. I had not spoken to them in months, yet I felt closer to them than anyone else. They were my adversaries, my project, my cautionary tale. And still, a part of me wondered if I had gone too far. Maybe I had unleashed machinery that would never stop grinding. Maybe, in destroying my bad neighbors, I had fed the very conspiracy I imagined. What if the real shadow economy was not theirs, but the one I had set in motion? Insurance claims feeding bank systems, feeding federal audits, feeding debt cycles. What if I had become just another cog, another citizen weaponized by bureaucracy? The thought made me laugh out loud, a sharp, bitter laugh that startled my son. "What's funny, Dad?" he asked. I looked at him, lacing up those sneakers, the ones they had tried to steal, and said, "Nothing, buddy. Just thinking about how crazy neighbors can be." But inside, I knew it was more than that. Bad neighbors had started as a nuisance and become my obsession, my crusade, my private satire of America itself. And I was not finished yet, not by a long shot. By autumn, the whole neighborhood had changed, not because the leaves were falling or the kids were back in school, but because the Turner's house had turned into a monument of American ruin. The lawn was brown and brittle, a foreclosure notice flapping against the door, their pickup truck long gone. Some evenings I would see Sheila pacing with a phone in her hand, shouting words like collections and default and appeal. Ron had vanished into his garage, the glow of a single bulb flickering through the cracks, as though he was cooking up schemes, or maybe just hiding from reality. To me, it was not just justice anymore. It had become theater. A tragicomic play where my bad neighbors were the actors, and the script was written in insurance clauses and federal codes. Every time I checked the mail, another notice arrived. Subpoenas, penalties, updates on the investigation. I never had to set foot in their house. The paperwork was doing the work for me, grinding them down like gears in an endless machine. But then the story took a turn so absurd I had to laugh at its sheer madness. One night, a black SUV parked down the street. Two men in suits stepped out, walked directly to the Turner's door, and knocked. Not police uniforms, no. These were the kind of suits that meant alphabet agencies. They were inside for nearly an hour. I sat in my living room with the lights off, sipping coffee, watching shadows move across the curtains. When they left, Ron followed them out, his face pale, his hands twitching. He looked across the street at my house, and for a second, I could swear he mouthed, "You did this." Maybe I did. Or maybe the machine I had set in motion had grown beyond me. It was no longer about missing sneakers or drill sets. The Turner's address had become a flagged site in multiple federal databases. I knew because one day, by mistake, a letter meant for them arrived in my mailbox. It was from the Department of Commerce, stamped with words I had never seen before. Suspicion of unauthorized goods redistribution. My bad neighbors, who once strutted around with my router under their arm, were now suspects in an international goods diversion network. The idea was so overblown it was almost beautiful. And yet part of me believed it. Because why else would the suits come at night? Why else would my insurance adjuster, who once cared only about porch cameras, now call me asking for extended testimony on neighborhood package activity? I laughed, but I gave him everything. Videos, logs, even my conspiracy board sketches. If they wanted a witness, I would be their star witness. I was not just fighting bad neighbors anymore. I was exposing what I half-jokingly called the porch piracy industrial complex. The punishment snowballed in ways that bordered on surreal. Their credit score plunged so low it might as well have been negative. Their home loan was revoked, their utilities flagged as high risk, their bank accounts frozen. They tried to fight back. I know because I overheard Ron on the phone saying words like appeal, and lawyer. But in America, once the system smells blood, lawyers are just men with briefcases chasing a tidal wave. And still, I could not shake the humor of it all. Imagine Ron, the man who once swaggered shirtless with my Amazon box, now sitting in a sterile office across from a federal auditor, trying to explain why his address had 200 separate claims tied to it. Imagine Sheila, cigarette trembling in her hand, staring at a letter stamped with an eagle and the words, "asset seizure." If satire could walk, it would have looked like the Turners' living room. The climax came when their house went dark. Not just the lights, but everything. Utilities shut, mailbox taped over, cars gone. One morning, a moving truck pulled up. Not theirs, but the bank's. Men in uniforms hauled their furniture onto the street. A crowd gathered, whispering. Some laughed, some shook their heads. I stood at my window, silent. It was not joy I felt. It was something colder, heavier, like standing at the end of a story you had written yourself. In that silence, I realized the revenge had outgrown me. It had become satire, conspiracy, almost science fiction. My bad neighbors, who once acted like it was totally fine to steal a box of sneakers, had been devoured by the same system they thought they could mock. The machine I had unleashed, insurance, finance, federal law, had chewed them up and spat them out. And I had pulled the first lever. Was it fair? Maybe not. Was it American? Absolutely. This is a country where your greatest weapon is not your fists, but your forms, where justice comes in the shape of a letterhead stamped with government seals. I had not yelled at them, had not confronted them in the street. I had filed, reported, documented, and waited. And in America, that is how you win wars with bad neighbors. The night after they left, I walked over to their porch. The lawn was dead, the mailbox empty, the windows boarded. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of what had happened. I thought of my son, his sneakers finally safe on his feet, and of my wife, who had begged me to let it go. I thought of Ron's face, pale under the porch light, mouthing those words, "You did this." And maybe I had. Maybe I had gone too far, turned a neighborhood squabble into a federal case, transformed porch piracy into a national conspiracy. But as I stood there, I realized something important. Bad neighbors will always exist. The question is not whether you can stop them. The question is whether you can outlast them, outsmart them, out-paperwork them. As I turned to walk back to my house, I whispered to myself, "Packages delivered, lesson delivered." It was not joy. It was not sorrow. It was the peculiar peace that comes from knowing you had played the American game and for once won. When the Turners' house finally went up for auction, it felt like the closing credits of a long, absurd film. The for sale sign out front had a plastic smile, the kind that banks slap onto tragedy. A new family would come eventually, maybe repaint the shutters, maybe mow the lawn back into respectability, but for now, it stood empty, hollow, echoing with the ghosts of late-night shouting matches and cigarette smoke. To the untrained eye, it was just another foreclosed property. To me, it was a monument, proof that bad neighbors had consequences in America. I did not feel joy, not exactly. It was stranger than that, like finishing a novel that had consumed me, only to find myself staring at the last page, wondering if I had been the villain all along. Because the truth was, I had not just beaten them, I had annihilated them. Through insurance clauses, federal complaints, credit freezes, and audits, I had reduced Ron and Sheila Turner from smug porch pirates to ghosts in a bankrupt house. And while part of me reveled in that triumph, another part whispered that maybe I had gone too far. Neighbors whispered too. Some congratulated me quietly, with nods and smirks in the driveway. Others kept their distance, unsure if I was a hero or a madman with a filing cabinet. I heard one woman mutter at the mailbox, "He weaponized the system." She was right. I had discovered a distinctly American form of revenge. Not fists, not public humiliation, but paperwork sharp enough to draw blood. The same machinery that suffocates the powerless had become my sword and shield. And yet, even in victory, the absurdity of it all would not leave me. I found myself imagining Ron and Sheila not as petty thieves, but as pawns in some cosmic satire. Maybe the porch piracy network was real. Maybe they had been recruited by shadowy figures who paid them in stolen routers to destabilize suburban America. Or maybe they were just two lazy people who thought free packages were a perk of homeownership. I will never know. The conspiracy in my head was more interesting than the likely truth. Life returned to normal, at least on the surface. My packages arrived and stayed on my porch. My son laced up his sneakers without fear of them disappearing. My wife relaxed, no longer side-eyeing every delivery truck. The neighborhood felt calmer, quieter, almost too quiet. Some nights, sipping coffee by the window, I missed the chaos. Bad neighbors had given me purpose, a battle to fight. Without them, life was ordinary. That was the real lesson, I think. We need enemies, or at least we think we do. The Turners were never worthy adversaries. They were clumsy thieves, careless and shameless. But I turned them into something bigger, a symbol, a conspiracy, a satire of the whole system. And in destroying them, I learned something uncomfortable. Revenge is addictive. Once you taste it, you look for new ways to feed it, new targets to aim your paperwork cannon at. I kept the file, of course. Turner theft still sits in my desk drawer, thick with evidence and letters, like a relic of some suburban holy war. Sometimes I flip through it, remembering the escalation from sneakers to subpoenas, from routers to federal audits. It reads like a novel, one I wrote with forms and signatures. But when I close the drawer, I remind myself of the final truth. Bad neighbors will always exist. They will blast their music at midnight, let their dogs bark through the night, steal packages, park in front of your driveway. You cannot eliminate them from the world. You can only choose how you respond, whether you ignore them, confront them, or, like me, bury them under the weight of American bureaucracy. Would I do it again? Probably. But I would do it knowing the cost: time, obsession, a creeping paranoia that turned into late-night conspiracy boards. I won the war, but it changed me too. It showed me that in America, power is not about shouting the loudest or throwing the hardest punch. Power is knowing which form to file, which code to cite, which insurance clause to activate. The Turners thought stealing packages was totally fine. They acted like they were untouchable, like suburban life was just a free buffet. But in the end, it was not me that destroyed them. It was the machine. I just learned how to push the right buttons. So, now when a package arrives, I take a moment before I pick it up. I look around my quiet street, at the empty house next door, at the calmness that has returned, and I think to myself, this box is more than just sneakers or a drill set. It is proof that sometimes, in the land of paperwork and penalties, you can win against bad neighbors. Then I carry it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and smile. Not the smug smile of revenge, but the weary smile of a man who knows he survived the strangest suburban war imaginable.